Stop. Don't eat that. The voice pierced through the calm buzz of silverware and soft jazz at the garden bistro, slicing the late morning air like a warning shot before disaster. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A fork clattered onto a plate. Could this be a life-or-death moment? Near the center of the terrace, under a cream-colored umbrella, Charles Hale sat with a spoon poised inches from his lips. At 74, he was a pillar of Los Angeles society. A real estate magnate, Navy veteran, and philanthropist known for keeping his voice low and his standards high. Dressed in a tailored gray blazer and light blue shirt with a subtle check, he looked like a man who had nothing left to prove. Beside him sat his wife, Veronica Hale, 40 years younger, stunning in every regard. Her fitted cream dress matched the table linen, and her manicured fingers sparkled with understated wealth. Her phone, resting screen up next to the soup bowl, buzzed once. She didn't flinch. Just beyond the low-row iron fence that circled the cafe's patio, a boy hovered, thin, dark-skinned, hood pulled halfway up despite the warm spring breeze. His sneakers were mismatched, the left laced with twine. But his eyes, large, alert, burning, were fixed on one thing. Charles Hale's bowl of carrot bisque. What secret did this boy hold? Eli Carter was 13 and hungry. He didn't remember what it was like to eat slowly anymore. Food, if he found it, was devoured. Sometimes scavenged from trash bins behind taco trucks. Sometimes traded for cigarettes he never smoked. He knew better than to draw attention in places like this. The garden bistro wasn't for people like him, but he had wandered closer than usual today, following the scent of roasted garlic and warm butter until he could almost taste it. And that's when he saw it. Veronica reaching into her designer handbag, fingers brushing past a wallet, a tube of lipstick, and then pulling out something small. A tiny bottle, clear, no label, no hesitation. She twisted the cap with a flick of her wrist and tilted her hand slightly. The liquid fell into the steaming bowl in a stream so fine, so practiced that it could have gone unnoticed. It would have if Eli hadn't been watching. She stirred the soup slowly, gracefully. Her expression remained unchanged, but then she leaned forward across the table, her voice soft, just audible to the boy with sharp ears and sharper instincts. After all the trouble I've gone through, you won't ruin this now. Eli's breath caught. Something inside him, older than his years, harder than his life, stirred. For a moment, he did nothing. Who would believe him? He was just a hungry kid. A street rat, as the men in uniforms sometimes muttered. He looked around. Waiters with trays, businessmen with phones, a woman laughing too loudly. No one else noticed. No one else saw. His stomach growled. It reminded him he could walk away. Pretend he didn't see. It wasn't his business. Then he remembered a voice. Officer Jimenez, the one security guard who didn't treat him like trash. Real courage, he once said, handing Eli half a sandwich, is when no one sees you do it. Charles's hand reached for the spoon. Eli's body moved before he could think. He pushed open the patio gate, the latch clicked too loudly, and walked straight toward the table. Every step was heavy, like dragging chains through water. Stop. Don't eat that. Charles froze, spoon suspended midair. Veronica's head snapped around. What did you just say? Her tone was sharp, brittle. Eli's throat tightened, but the words came out. Don't eat it. She put something in your soup. I saw her. Gasps rippled around the patio. Veronica stood slowly. Her smile didn't return. You little liar, she hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. Who let you in here? Security. But Eli didn't back down. She took something from her purse. A bottle. Clear. Poured it in when you were looking at your phone. He pointed to the soup, then to her bag. You can smell it. You don't have to believe me. Just check. Charles stared at the boy, then at his wife. Her face had gone pale, lips pressed in a tight line. Veronica? He asked, voice low. She let out a breathy laugh. Charles, really? This is absurd. He's clearly a vagrant looking for attention. Maybe food, maybe money. Why are we even entertaining this? The boy's voice rose. I don't want your money. His fists clenched. But if you eat that soup, you'll regret it. I swear there was something in his voice, a clarity, not fear, but resolve. Charles slowly lowered the spoon to the table. The silence stretched, thick as the fog that rolled in from the coast on winter mornings. Then the maitre d' stepped forward. Sir, should I call the police? Veronica turned to him, aghast. What? Absolutely not. This is harassment. Charles didn't look away from Eli. Yes, he said quietly. Call them. And in that moment, as waitstaff scattered and the city hummed on beyond the fence, Eli Carter stood straighter, the smallest person in the room, yet somehow the loudest voice. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He hadn't come this far to stay silent. You heard him wrong, Veronica said, her tone tightening like piano wire. That boy is delusional. But no one moved. The air in the garden bistro had turned electric, charged with disbelief, curiosity, and something else no one wanted to admit aloud. Suspicion. Charles Hale hadn't touched the spoon again. He leaned back slightly in his seat, his piercing gray eyes fixed on his wife. Not with anger, not yet, but with a chilling, quiet calculation. The kind of look that came not from impulse, but from years of knowing when something didn't add up. Across from him, Eli Carter stood still. His chest heaved from adrenaline, but his eyes were steady. There was no stammer in his voice, no twitch of manipulation. Just a 13-year-old kid, ragged but defiant, standing inches from power, pointing at a crime that hadn't been committed yet. The maitre d' had vanished inside to call the police, and a few diners subtly began recording with their phones. Forks hovered in midair. Conversation was extinct. I saw her pull a small bottle from her purse. Eli repeated, voice steady. It looked like one of those little medicine bottles. Clear. She poured it in, stirred it like nothing happened. He looked at Charles. You were checking your phone. You didn't see it. Veronica let out a high, breathy laugh. The kind women practiced in mirrors. Charles, darling, please. This is a child. He's confused. Or hungry. Or both. Can we just, I'm not confused? Eli cut in. And I'm not hungry for your money. I just didn't want to watch you die. Her mask faltered. A flicker, just one, crossed her face. Not fear, not guilt. Rage. Charles caught it. You've been different lately, he said slowly, still not looking at the soup. Distant, distracted. He turned to her, speaking not with volume, but weight. Now this. Veronica's voice dropped as if hoping to speak beneath the buzz of attention. Are you seriously taking the word of a street rat over your wife? Eli didn't move. Check the soup. Smell it. Get it tested. I'm not asking you to believe me. Just don't ignore it. A waiter, trembling slightly, stepped forward. Sir, if I may. He leaned over and sniffed. His brows furrowed. There's something odd. Veronica slammed her hand on the table. Are you all out of your minds? He's manipulating you. He probably slipped something in while we weren't looking. Charles's face went pale, but not from fear, from recognition. He looked back at the boy. What's your name? Eli. Last name? Carter. You've done this before? Eli blinked. No, sir. I've never done anything like this, but I know what I saw. And why would she do it? Eli hesitated. I don't know. His voice softened. But whatever her reason, it doesn't change what I saw. Veronica rose to her full height. Her voice venom-slick. I've been loyal to you. I stood by you while you recovered from surgery. I stayed when everyone else treated you like a relic. Charles didn't flinch. That wasn't loyalty. That was PR. She stiffened. Excuse me. He reached for the spoon again. Not to eat, but to study it. His hand trembled. Not from age, but from memory. Trust being questioned is heavier than betrayal. It drags at the bones. I've seen poisons in combat that dissolve without a trace. Colorless, odorless, but not always tasteless. He turned to a waiter. Bring me a clean spoon. No. Veronica barked. Then, realizing how loud she sounded, she lowered her tone. Please, Charles. You don't have to prove anything. This is nonsense. Don't humiliate us. You mean don't humiliate you? Charles said, gasps from nearby tables. Eli stood silently, fists clenched. I didn't want to ruin your life, he said softly. But I wasn't going to watch you lose yours either. Then, like a thread finally snapping, Veronica snapped. You don't get it. I gave up everything for you. You think this was love? She laughed bitterly. You were never supposed to last this long. The moment froze. Someone dropped their glass. Charles's jaw clenched, but he didn't raise his voice. What did you say? Her face turned ghost white. I meant I didn't. Footsteps approached from behind. 2 LAPD officers entered the patio, hands resting on their belts. Sir, ma'am, one said, we got a report of possible poisoning. Veronica turned to them quickly. It's a misunderstanding. That boy, he's unstable. Probably on something. You can't trust what he says. Charles didn't even blink. The soup is right there. I want it tested right now. The officer nodded and stepped forward. But as he reached for the bowl, don't. Veronica snapped, stepping in front of it. It was too late. The hesitation, the panic, the misplaced authority in her voice. The crowd saw it. The cameras caught it. The officer's brows furrowed. Ma'am, if there's nothing to hide, there's no reason to stop us. I didn't mean. Charles stood slowly, taller than he looked, seated, firmer than he'd felt in years. You meant every word, he said. The moment you picked the bottle, you meant it. Veronica looked around, but no one would meet her eyes. The whispers had turned into conclusions. She glanced at Eli. You little bastard. He didn't flinch. I saw what I saw, he said simply. And I wasn't going to let you get away with it. The officer stepped forward again. Ma'am, I'm placing you under investigative detainment pending toxicology. Please put your hands where I can see them. Veronica backed away. You don't understand. He's ruined everything. No, Charles said, voice like gravel. You did. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Veronica let out a scream that startled birds from the trees nearby. The diners sat silent. No one applauded. No one cheered. They just watched. Eli turned to go quietly. His job was done. He hadn't stayed for thanks. But before he could leave the patio, Charles called after him. Eli. The boy stopped. Where do you think you're going? Eli turned slowly. I don't know, sir. Then come sit, Charles said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Eli Carter took a seat at a table where no one told him to leave. The silver handcuffs gleamed in the noonday sun, biting into Veronica's wrists as the officers guided her past stunned diners. She tried to keep her chin high, but her eyes darted wildly, searching for someone, anyone, to defend her. No one did, not even Charles. He remained seated, his hand resting gently on the edge of the table, inches from the untouched bowl of soup. Its surface had cooled. The faint swirl of color no longer inviting. In its stillness, it resembled something else entirely. A trap that hadn't sprung, a silence that might have been eternal. Eli sat across from him now, knees pulled together, shoulders tense. He looked smaller somehow, despite everything he'd just done. Maybe because the part where people start asking questions had begun. One of the officers, a middle-aged black man with a tired kindness in his eyes, turned to Charles. "We'll need to send the soup in for toxicology. There's a lab in downtown that handles these fast." Charles nodded. "Do it and make sure you record the chain of custody. I want everything official." The officer took the bowl carefully, placing it into a secure container that another officer brought in. Veronica's screams had faded into the distance, swallowed by the glass doors of the bistro's lobby. The remaining patrons began murmuring again. Some whispered, others recorded. A few quietly stood to leave. But one table of older women stayed, their hands resting on their purses, lips pressed tight, watching, not because of the scandal, but because of the boy. Eli shifted. "Can I go now?" Charles looked at him carefully. "Is that what you want?" "I don't belong here," the boy murmured. "Never did." Charles didn't answer at first. He turned his gaze outward toward the cafe fence where Eli had first appeared. A soft breeze rustled the nearby hedges. The fountain beyond gurgled without care, as if the world hadn't almost broken in half just 10 minutes ago. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. "You were the only one who saw something wrong. Out of everyone here, waiters, managers, diners with doctorates and gold watches, you were the only one who acted." Eli looked away. "Yeah, and she called me a liar." "She called you that because she was afraid of what you knew," Charles said. "People like her hide behind etiquette and style, but underneath they're more desperate than you can imagine." The boy hesitated. "Why would she want to hurt you?" Charles didn't answer right away. Then he spoke slower this time, like the words weighed more than he wanted to admit. "Veronica married me because I represented something. Power, security, a shortcut." "You didn't know?" "I did," he said. "But sometimes loneliness feels more dangerous than a bad decision, especially when you're old enough to know better." Eli didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. The officer who'd taken the soup returned. "We've sent it off. Should have preliminary results by tonight." He looked at Charles. "Sir, you may want to consider pressing formal charges." "Her confession." "She'll have her day in court," Charles said simply. Eli stood. "You don't need me anymore." "Sit," Charles said more gently than before. "Please." The boy obeyed, though reluctantly. "I have a question for you," Charles continued. "How long have you been on the streets?" Eli didn't answer at first. His eyes flicked to the waiter, now sweeping crumbs from a nearby table, then to the empty chair where Veronica had been. Finally, he muttered. "Since my mom died, 2 years." Charles exhaled through his nose. "Any family?" "No one I'd trust." "You trust me?" "I didn't say that," Eli replied. "I just didn't want you to die." "That doesn't mean I trust you." Charles nodded slowly. "Fair enough." There was a long pause. The wind picked up. A napkin fluttered across the patio floor. "Do you know what justice feels like, Eli?" Charles finally said. The boy shook his head. "It's not loud. It's not satisfying. It doesn't shout or dance when it wins." He looked down at his soup bowl's empty imprint. "Justice is silent. It's surviving something you weren't supposed to. It's the taste of a meal you didn't eat." Eli's voice was quiet. "Then why does it still feel so heavy?" "Because the truth always costs something," Charles said. "Even when you're right." From inside, the waiter approached holding a phone. "Sir, your assistant is on the line. Wants to know if you're all right." Charles took it, stood, and walked a few paces away. Eli sat alone, rubbing his fingers along the edge of the table. The conversation was hushed, but the old man's posture had changed, straightened, sharpened. He returned 2 minutes later and put the phone down. "I've arranged something," he said. "There's a man I trust, George Whitmore. He's the director of a youth center over in Echo Park. He's on his way here now. You'll spend the night there." Eli's brows knit. I didn't ask for help. You didn't have to. Charles's expression softened. Listen, you didn't save my life because you wanted anything. That's what makes what you did rare. I just didn't want to walk away from something that felt wrong. And that, Charles said, tapping the table gently with one finger, is the first instinct of a decent man. Eli didn't respond, not immediately. But for the first time in a very long while, he didn't feel the need to leave. From the distance, sirens howled again, this time far off somewhere else. Someone else's trouble. Inside the cafe, the manager placed a new reservation plaque on the table next to theirs. It read reserved for Mr. C. Hale. The man nodded to Charles. Eli glanced at the sign, then at the glass of water in front of him. He took a small sip. Cool. Clean. Is it weird? He asked suddenly. That I'm not scared anymore. Charles shook his head. No, it just means you finally let yourself sit still. The boy didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed just a little, and outside the fence where he once stood alone, the world went on. But now, with one more boy inside, and one less mask at the table. By the time the last guest left the garden bistro that afternoon, the sun had begun its slow descent behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the patio tiles. What had once been a haven for whispered business deals and quiet brunches had in just a few hours transformed into something else entirely. A courtroom, a battleground, a stage for a boy the world had overlooked. Eli sat on the edge of a cushioned bench just inside the cafe now closed to the public. He'd been moved in from the patio at Charles's quiet request, given a plate of roasted chicken, green beans, and cornbread that he had yet to touch. Hunger had been his constant companion for years, but now, strangely, he had no appetite. Across the room, Charles Hale stood near the fireplace, speaking in low tones with George Whitmore, the director from Echo Park Youth Shelter. George was a broad-shouldered black man in his 50s, dressed in an open denim shirt and khaki slacks. The kind of man who'd lived through his own storms and decided to build roofs for others. I'll keep him safe, George said firmly. No press. No pressure, just stability, meals, some therapy, maybe even school again if he wants it. Charles nodded. And if he wants more, George offered a quiet smile. Then we make away. Charles looked over at Eli. The boy sat with his arms resting on the table, staring at nothing in particular, as if still deciding whether he was part of the room or just visiting. He's got something in him, Charles murmured. Steel. Most men don't find that until it's too late. George followed his gaze. That's because most men never had to carry what he has. There was a pause between them. It was not filled with silence, but with understanding. Then Charles walked over and sat beside Eli. He didn't speak at first, just looked down at the untouched plate. Not hungry? Eli shrugged. I don't know, just tired, maybe. Charles didn't push. Instead, he leaned back and let the fire's warmth reach his hands. When I was your age, he began. I stole canned peaches from a corner store in Milwaukee. Got caught. Owner was a World War II vet. Scared the hell out of me. Eli looked at him, brow furrowed. You know what he said? Charles continued. You steal peaches, you're hungry. You steal twice, you're angry. Third time, you're not stealing, you're becoming. That stuck with me. Eli turned away again. I'm not becoming anything. Charles let the moment settle before speaking again. You already did. From behind them, George approached. Hey kid, you ready? Got a bed with clean sheets waiting for you. No curfews tonight. Eli hesitated, glancing at Charles. Am I in trouble? No, Charles said. You're in transition. Eli stood slowly, the stiffness of the day written in every movement. But just before he stepped away, he turned back. Why you help me? Because when you told the truth, you stood alone. Charles's answer came without pause. I'd been rich long enough to know how rare that is. Eli nodded once. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes, something tight and guarded, loosened just a little. As George let him out, Charles called after him. "Eli," the boy turned. Charles reached into his pocket and pulled out a small round object. He walked it over and placed it in Eli's palm. A worn bronze Navy Challenge coin. Eli turned it over. "What's this?" "Proof," Charles said, "that you did something brave. When you're older and people try to tell you who you are, hold on to that. Let it remind you of the day you didn't back down." Eli held it like it was glass. "Thanks." And then he was gone. The doors closed. The fireplace crackled. Outside, the city exhaled again. Later that evening, Charles sat alone at his kitchen table. Not the long formal one in the dining hall of his penthouse, but the smaller wooden table near the back window, the one where he once drank coffee with his late first wife before life became a series of quarterly meetings and television interviews. On the counter sat the lab report from the police. Positive for a lethal dose of amobarbital. Tasteless, odorless, confirmed. There would be trials, lawyers, media frenzy. But none of that weighed on him now. What clung to him was the image of a boy standing barefoot on a stone patio, voice cracking but spine straight, speaking a truth no one asked him to carry. He picked up his phone, scrolled to his assistant's number, and dictated a message. "Start the paperwork. I'm creating a foundation. Eli Carter Trust. Initial endowment, $10 million. Mission, protect and elevate children who've been forgotten." There was a long pause before he hit send. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a second Navy coin, and set it gently on the table beside his glass. He stared at it for a while, a reminder that justice had a voice that day. And it didn't come from money or influence or courtroom power. It came from a boy nobody saw who spoke anyway. News of the poisoning attempt spread like spilled ink, fast, irreversible, and staining everything it touched. By morning, every major network had a headline. "Billionaire's wife arrested in alleged murder plot saved by a homeless teen." Photos of Veronica Hale in handcuffs, her face twisted in disbelief, were plastered on televisions, smartphones, and the front page of the Los Angeles Times. Talk show hosts speculated endlessly. Political pundits dissected the class angle and social media. It exploded. But amid the chaos, the one person at the center of it all, Eli Carter, stayed silent. He hadn't returned to the streets. He hadn't spoken to reporters. He hadn't chased any spotlight. He was at the Echo Park Youth Shelter, sleeping in a twin bed under a roof that didn't leak. For the first time in years, he had a pillow to himself and no need to sleep with one eye open. On the fourth morning, Charles Hale arrived unannounced. He stepped out of a black Lincoln Navigator, dressed not in a suit, but in a navy sweatshirt and jeans. He carried no security detail, no briefcase, just a small brown paper bag and something folded under one arm. George greeted him with a nod and led him through the quiet hallway, past rooms echoing with muffled laughter and cartoon voices. They found Eli alone in the art room, seated at a wooden table near the window, sketching something with a worn pencil. Charles didn't speak immediately. He walked over slowly, watching the boy's hands. They moved with precision, sharpened by survival, but softened by the stillness of safety. "What are you drawing?" Charles asked. Eli looked up. "I don't know yet. Maybe a bridge." Charles nodded. "Bridges are good. They get people from where they are to where they need to be." He handed Eli the brown paper bag. "Turkey and cheddar. Extra mustard." Eli took it surprised. "You remembered." "I've been forgetful lately," Charles replied. "But not about things that matter." They sat in silence for a moment. The boy unwrapping his sandwich. The man watching dust dance in a beam of sunlight. Then Charles unfolded the item under his arm. A photograph matted and framed. It showed a young boy barefoot in a wheat field holding a kite made of newspaper. The photo was black and white, but time hadn't dulled its spirit. "That's me," Charles said. 1958, Wisconsin. My mother took the photo. We couldn't afford toys, so we made them out of whatever we had. Eli studied the picture for a long time. You were poor. We had more holes in the roof than we had money in the bank, Charles said. But I had a mother who saw me, who listened. Eli looked down. I barely remember mine. Charles leaned forward, voice quieter now. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to have the world walk past you like you're smoke. But last week, you weren't invisible. You were the only one in that cafe who saw the truth, who chose to speak. Eli didn't reply. He stared at his half-eaten sandwich like it was a test he couldn't pass. Charles reached into his pocket and placed something on the table between them. The same Navy challenge coin. I want you to keep it, he said. Not because you saved my life, but because you reminded me what it means to live with honor. Eli touched the coin. Feels heavy. It should, Charles said. It's not just metal. It's everything that came before it. Every choice, every sacrifice. Eli finally looked up. Why are you here? To tell you this. I'm not done helping you, and I'm not doing it out of guilt or pity. He paused. You're not a project, Eli. You're a person, and someone needs to stand beside you until the world sees that. The boy's throat tightened. He wanted to say thank you, but couldn't find the words. Instead, he just nodded. Charles stood. I've got something else to show you. He led Eli outside around the shelter to the back, where a narrow courtyard opened onto a community garden. In the middle stood a new wooden bench beneath a modest metal archway. On the bench, a small bronze plaque had been fastened. It read, "In honor of Eli Carter for choosing truth over silence." Eli stared at it, stunned. You didn't have to do this. I know, Charles said. But sometimes the world needs to be reminded that voices like yours matter. A breeze stirred the leaves. A small bird landed on the archway, chirped twice, then fluttered away. Eli sat down on the bench. His hands rested on his knees. For once, they didn't tremble. Do you think things will ever go back to normal? He asked. Charles placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. I hope not. Because what's normal for the world isn't always right. They sat in silence, the older man and the younger boy. Each shaped by different battles, each carrying truths they never asked for. But for that moment, they shared something deeper than blood or name. Respect. And in that quiet space behind a shelter few knew existed, Eli began to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't ending. It was starting. A week later, in a quiet press room at the Los Angeles Public Library, the cameras were rolling. There were no bright stage lights, no red carpets, just a podium, a banner with the city's seal, and a handful of reporters who had expected something more glamorous. But Charles Hale never cared for spectacle. He stood behind the podium, hands resting lightly on either side, dressed in a simple navy suit with no tie. The room hushed. I don't usually speak in public anymore, Charles began, his voice deep, steady. And when I do, it's rarely about personal matters, but today I want to tell you a story. A short one. He paused, eyes scanning the room. Last week, I nearly died. A few reporters stiffened. Not because of old age or illness, but because someone close to me made a choice, a devastating one, and I didn't see it coming. No one did. He adjusted the microphone slightly, but someone saw. Someone no one expected. A boy barely 13. No title, no inheritance, no name you'd recognize. But he had eyes wide open and a voice that refused to stay silent. Murmurs rippled across the room. He could have turned away, could have watched from behind the fence where people told him he belonged. But instead, he stepped forward. And in doing so, he reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That courage rarely arrives dressed in power. It shows up in rags, hungry and uncertain, but unwilling to let wrong be called right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. He held it up. A coin, bronze, scratched, weathered. This is my Navy challenge coin. I've carried it for decades through combat, through boardrooms, through loss. I gave it away last week to the only person I've met in years who truly earned it. He lowered the coin slowly. Let the moment breathe. And today I'm announcing the creation of the Eli Carter Foundation, a $10 million trust to support, educate, and elevate children who are often unseen. Kids who fall between systems, who sleep on benches but dream like kings. Kids who, like Eli, carry truth inside them, even when no one asks them to. He took a step back from the microphone. Justice isn't loud, he said, voice soft but heavy. It doesn't always look like victory. It waits. It watches. And when it speaks, his eyes lifted to the crowd, it doesn't yell, it just doesn't flinch. A beat of silence, then cameras clicked. Reporters scrambled to their feet. Questions flew. But Charles had said what he came to say. He walked out of the room without answering a single question. That evening, while the city digested the speech, Eli sat in the small two-room apartment Charles's team had arranged. It was modest. White walls, second-hand couch, a bookshelf with only 3 titles so far, but it was his. He stood in the kitchen, barefoot on cold tile, staring at a magnet stuck to the fridge. It was cheap, shaped like California, with a quote in peeling gold print, "It's not where you come from, it's where you're going." He didn't know who put it there. He didn't care. The doorbell rang. Eli opened it cautiously. George stood there with 2 plastic bags of groceries and a wide grin. "Told you I'd drop by." Eli stepped aside, letting him in. "You didn't have to." George set the bags down. People who matter shouldn't have to do everything alone. Eli's eyes flicked toward the living room where the coin sat on the shelf beside the framed bench plaque Charles had given him. "You think all this will last?" he asked. George looked him in the eye. "That depends." "You planning on going backward?" Eli shook his head. "No, not ever." "Then yeah," George said. "It'll last." They shared a quiet meal. Just soup and bread. But for Eli, it was a feast. There was no fear of it being taken. No rush to swallow it before someone else did. Just warmth and space. After George left, Eli sat by the window. Outside, the sky turned deep orange and the streetlights began to glow. In the distance, the city pulsed with the same chaos it always had. But now it sounded farther away, like background music in a life that finally had a lead character. He held the coin in his hand, thumb brushing over its edge. He thought of Veronica's voice, cold, sharp, empty. He thought of Charles's eyes, sad but still seeing. He thought of his mother. Then he whispered as if speaking to her ghost. "I did the right thing." And for the first time in years, he believed it. As night fell, Eli locked the door, not because he feared the world, but because he had something worth protecting now. A space, a story, a future. And this time the story didn't end in silence. It ended with a door that closed gently behind him and stayed closed because he was finally inside. Brought to you by BUP Stories.